Shalom and welcome to another in our series of podcasts from Temple Beth Am, a dynamic center for conservative Judaism in Los Angeles. This is a recording of Rabbi Adam Kligfeld's weekly Rashi study class.
You can get ready by opening up your Chumash to second chapter of Shemot, verse 3. Really the opening verses of the life of the person who's going to dominate all the rest of the Torah.
Who's that?
Yeah. We know who he's going to be, but he doesn't yet know who he's going to be. And the text, as it were, doesn't know who he's going to be. The text is just dealing with it as the birth of a baby. But of course, even in the Rashi we read last week, the fact that when he was born, the whole house was filled with light. It was an omen, a positive omen, according to the Midrash, that this was the birth, even if it's a somewhat Christological image, the birth of someone significant who is going to bring light to the world. Okay, let's jump in. So let's see, who would like to read? Marshall, do you want to read? Let me actually just review the verse itself, and then Marshall will jump in with the Rashi. So after, in verse 2, we learned that the house was filled with light. Well, the pshat was that she saw the baby, and it was Tov. The baby was Tov. We discussed what Tov could have meant here. She decided to hide the baby 3 months. We discussed what could the relationship be between her seeing the Tov in the baby and the decision to hide the baby. Is the decision to save your child based on how good the child is. We moved past that. And then we got to verse 3, V'lo yachla od hatzfino. She could no longer conceal him. Vatikach lo tevat goma. She took for herself a basket made of some kind of a wicker or reed. Vatachmara vachemar uvazafet. And she clayed it with clay and also with pitch. Vatasem ba et hayeled. And she placed the boy into it. Vatasem basuv. She placed it in the reeds. Al svat hayor, along the edge of the river, or the edge of the Nile. So that's what the verse was. Any lingering comments or questions on the verse before we jump into the Rashi? No? Okay. So, Marshall, if you read the Rashi, please. And go nice and slow, because I'm going to pause you a few times.
Am I coming through clear since I had difficulty with my microphone the other day?
Yes.
Okay. Okay, so this is on verse Gimel. V'lo yachla od hatzfino. She was no longer able to conceal him. Shemanula hamitriim miyom shechzira. For the Egyptians counted her from the day that he took her back.
Right, and so Rashi is now speaking to himself a little bit. This sentence only makes sense if we accept what Rashi had said in the previous comment, which is that there had been a separation between what the people we're going to learn are named Amram and Yocheved, and then where Miriam chastises Amram for saying, your decree is worse than Pharaoh's. Pharaoh's decreeing only on the boys, you're decreeing on the boys and the girls by not having relations with your wife. And then he takes her back, and we had this whole romantic image of the fact that a miracle happened and she became young and nubile again. He takes her back, and that's what that hechzira means. So once he goes back and almost has a second wedding night with his wife, then the Egyptians counted. They counted for manu. That word manu is the same word from which we get minyan, right? Limnot in Hebrew is to count, right? So like monem mispar lekochabim lechulam shemot yikra. That God counts all the stars in the sky and gives each of them a name. So the Egyptians hovered, counting from the day that he came back. And how long were they going to be counting, ostensibly?
Okay. V'hi yiladatu l'shisha chodashim v'yom echad. Right.
So before you read that, so the suggestion in the fact that they counted is that they were going to be counting a gestation, right? So right. The image is that there were these officers of Pharaoh's police who were stationed at all the places where they imagined Hebrew women had conceived, and they knew they didn't have to worry about them for 9 months. They'd come back in 9 months and see if there's a baby. If there's a baby, do the dastardly deed. So they were waiting. But what happened? She tricked them.
Okay, v'hi yoladetu l'shisha chodashim v'yom echad. And she, however, bore him after, I guess, a period of 6 months and 1 day.
Very specific, right? So it's Rashi's way of saying that Moshe was a preemie, right? But it does raise the question, what's the significance of 6 months and 1 day? Remember that what problem in the verse is he trying to resolve? This question is for anyone. Rick, right? The 3 months, right? So what the problem in the verse, or the complexity of the verse is, if she had been committed to saving this boy's life by hiding him, what happened after 3 months that suggested that he was no longer either worthy of being hidden or able to be hidden? Lo yachla od hatzpino. She could not hide him anymore. Why not? So Rashi's trying to resolve that, and so he has to do it in such a way that makes sense of the 9 months of gestation on the one hand, and the 3 months of Moshe apparently being able to be hid easily. And so he says that she gave birth early. She gave birth early, essentially 6 months, 6 months and 1 day. And then he says something interesting that reflects, early rabbinic OBGYN guesswork, right? Which will not at all surprise you, is not 100% in line with 21st century understanding of medicine. But this was their understanding of premature babies. Go ahead.
Okay. Shehayoledet l'shiv'a yoledet lemiktu'in. Lemikota'in.
Mekuta'in, right.
Mekuta'in. For one who gives birth in 7 months, gives birth, I guess the Torah means to cut off. So notice the month is cut off. It's not a complete month.
Right. If you look at footnote 37, it brings you to a piece of Talmud having nothing to do with the story in Masechet Rosh Hashanah, where there's a discussion that says that a gestation is 9 months, but some women give birth early at 7 months. But what we mean by 7 months is 6 months. That it's almost, it says that if women are giving birth early, they're giving birth really early. Now, I have no idea if there's any truth to that in modern or ancient childbearing norms, right? I just don't know. I don't know if 2,000 years ago, if her pregnancy was not going all the way to term, was it going to end really much, much earlier rather than it coming to term at, a baby being born healthy, but early in 7 or 7.5 months? I don't know. But it also works out very mathematically easily right here. Yes, she gave birth early. You might think that giving birth early is 7 months. It is 7 months, but 7 months is really 6 months, 6 months and 1 day. Okay, keep going.
And they sought or after her at the end of 9 months.
Okay, so then in your own words, Marshall, how does this resolve the question in the verse? What happened after 3 months of the baby who's about to be called Moshe's life?
The baby started making noise.
So from our perspective, that might be an easy resolution to the pshat, but Rashi's circumventing that, right? That's what Renee put in the chat box, and Rachel agreed. My own personal opinion is the opposite, because my children screamed for the first 3 months of their life, and then only then started to become a little bit human and responding to our ability to calm them. But what Rashi's saying is not that after 3 months he started to make noise, but after 3 months the police came. That she bought herself 3 months. I mean, there's nothing in the Midrash that's saying that she did this willfully, but by having given birth early and miraculously a real preemie in Egypt surviving, she wasn't on the checklist to be investigated for whether or not she gave birth to a boy until 3 months later. So she had 3 months of investigationless parenting of this child. Once 3 months are up, basically her due date. At her due date, that's when Pharaoh's magistrates came around searching for her. Barry?
I don't get it. How is it that the Egyptian police know when every woman's gestation day begins?
The Midrash just kind of assumes it, and the Midrash also, remember Rashi connecting this comment to his comment in the previous verse, right? There seems to be some kind of a Midrashic understanding of a dramatic return of Yocheved to Amram, as if people knew it, right? That this woman who was older became young again. He goes back to her. They had a night in their hut, and therefore is an indication that this is a hut that needs to be checked 9 months from now, right? So this doesn't have to pass the muster of whether or not it really could have happened for Rashi to kind of use this as a way of resolving the problematics in the verse. I mean, and this is true of the whole story, right? Do we have to really imagine the exact system by which this Pharaoh set up the guards to go make sure that the baby boys were being thrown into the sea? We can, but we can also kind of hover a little bit over it and say, what is the value in the way the story is told? What are we supposed to learn about the way this Israelite community was resilient and creative against the murderousness of the oppressor? And yes, in order to do that, we have to believe somehow that it was known that Yocheved was pregnant. We'll check on her 9 months from now. How that could have happened, I don't know. And from the way I read the Midrash, it doesn't really matter. But I understand the question. Barbara?
I think from having examined hundreds, maybe thousands of your babies as opposed to normal 9-month babies, that every baby is different. When I stick that light in the eye, which is pretty bright, some babies scream, I need help to hold them down, to keep their eyes open. And other babies are amazing, and they're actually quiet when I do that. So I don't think you can say that what it is. I think every baby just is different, no matter which age at which they're born.
Yeah, of course that's true, right? And there's no way to generalize any of this. There's no way to generalize if a woman is giving birth early, how early she's giving birth. There's no way to generalize how quiet or tov a baby is. And remember that these stories are archetypes, right? It doesn't mean that there's no truth to them, but they're archetypes, and the Midrash working intentionally to make it even more archetypal. So the rabbis are reading a text which by the time they're reading it is already a primal core text that has become an archetype, and the rabbis are, I think, consciously, some would say unconsciously, are trying to make it yet more archetypal, more grand, more epic, more it's interesting, both more and less mythological at the same time. Less mythological in the sense of trying to reify it, more accessible, because some of the stories in the Torah are kind of are vague and leaving out details, but more mythological because they're trying to have the text become the pantheon of our storyline, right? And in order to do that, you have to create larger categories and generalizations. Barbara, yes.
The thing is that once a baby reaches the 7th month of gestation, the fetus, they're more likely to survive to full term and to live a long life than a baby born in the 6th month or before. Nowadays, we have a lot of babies that are born in the 5th and 6th month that need desperate measures to keep them alive. But 7-month babies, they still often need desperate measures to keep them alive.
Yeah.
But they're a little bit more survivable. The lungs are a little bit better, and they're less likely to develop respiratory distress. So maybe that's something that Rashi knew, that younger babies, 6-month fetus, more likely not to survive, and 7-month fetuses more likely to survive. He may have been thinking that.
Which makes his birth yet more miraculous, right? So
yes, that's right.
The miraculousness of the conception, because the conception only happened because Miriam chastised, and only happened because she somehow became more young and beautiful. And not only that, a baby that under even pharaonic decree circumstances, had no chance of surviving, first survived being born at 6 months, and only then to kind of live into the moment that was normatively dangerous for him, which is that people were out to murder him. Right.
Correct.
And listen, there is something, I would say, both obviously pre-Christological about it in the text itself, and as the rabbis are creating the midrash material around the same time that Jesus is being rendered by the text into Christ, something very evocative about a baby being born in miraculous conditions and as a savior, right? Moshe is born as a savior, born not in a manger, but born in a situation that he should have not survived either of the two conditions to become a savior. Rick and then Larry Diane.
Hi. Just to try to explain how the Egyptians might know, to give you a little perspective, in the olden days, in my profession, an insurance agent would go door to door to pick up premiums from people. Thank God I didn't ever have to do that. But you would know all your clients, you know where they live, you go to their door, you knock on the door, and you get the money. So in Rashi's time, the Crusades and all that, where the Jews are in ghettos and everybody, it's small communities and everybody knows everybody's business, I think that's his mindset. I'm just guessing that the Egyptians would be able to do that with their work crews, that they would know who's having kids and who's where. So just an idea.
Yeah. Thanks for that, Rick. It's like, because we've said a version of the following comment literally hundreds of times in this class, but it bears repeating because I sometimes have to repeat it to myself. Because we are reading this text, both as identified, religious, observant, caring Jews who are trying to extract religious meaning from these texts, and as modern history-reading, science-believing American humans, right? We both want to figure out, like, as precisely as possible, what's the most likely historical explanation for how something could have been. And we also don't, because we're comfortable with it staying in the realm of mythology, right? There's a little bit of like not that I think our religious life cannot tolerate willful ignorance. And I think in some parts of the religious community, they embrace willful ignorance, but we don't want to like intentionally not know something. We don't want to be la 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 la, but we are processing it on many levels simultaneously, and those levels which are contradictory to one another, right? So like, okay, I'll leave it there. Larry, Diane, and then Judy.
Okay, well, I'm going to say it. Diane was the one that first pointed this out. She didn't say what I'm going to say first, which is, I think we're going down a rabbit hole, but we often do. And I often wonder if some of these aren't offhand speculations by Rashi, which over the years we've made into something more. But I think you all know my own view about how Rashi's, how he got to the Rashi. Chezkuni sort of takes us in a different direction, and he understands completely what Rashi has said. But he goes into another explanation, which apparently is also from the same page in Sota that we've been talking about all along, that in fact, she was already pregnant 3 months when she remarried. So there's where you get the 3 months beforehand. Then he points out that at the end of the first Chezkuni, he says that Moses was born 3 months after Yocheved had been remarried. So both premature and even earlier than we would have thought from Rashi. Anybody else got another idea?
Larry, I can't wait for your first article on the Chizkuni, and I love how much you love the Chizkuni. So I've been thinking when we finish the entire Torah with Rashi, which commentary we should do next in 2071. Maybe Chizkuni, so stick around. Judy, Bavakasha.
Okay. I love what you said, Rabbi, about looking at it as both a from the religious perspective, the kind of the macro structure of what we're doing. And isn't that emblematic of our tradition to be able to hold the deep, the spiritual meaning that's unpacking the grammar to see, like, for example, why there's a repetition of a verb in two different forms back to back lends emphasis, or what could it be referring to, versus the historical criticism. And I think that the rabbis in the Talmud were able to hold both perspectives. So it really comes down to a matter of how much we can hold in our brains before we get overwhelmed with cognitive dissonance. But to just kind of hold, yes, there's this, and there's also this, as Rick was mentioning, what could have been happening during Egypt in that time to rationalize this verse.
Yeah.
So I think it's really cool because ultimately we're expanding our brains to be able to hold both.
Yeah. I'll just let that sit there because I can't improve upon it. I think that's wonderfully said, Judy.
What was that?
I said I'm just going to let that comment stand there because there's nothing I can do to improve upon that. Which is not to suggest that when I speak after you speak, anyone, I'm trying to improve upon what you said. I'm just trying to say that what Judy said is spot on. Okay, so I think we're mid Rashi. So Rashi's finished his comments on that part of the verse, right? So he's, at least to his own satisfaction, resolved this notion of the 3 months, right? Which we all agreed when we read the first time was an interestingly precise amount of time, right? Well, and then go back to the first thing that Renee wrote in the chat. Even though my own personal experience as a parent is that it's not the case, it very well could be that the pshat is it's when a baby is doing mostly sleeping and nursing, it might be easier to hide it from the authorities. Whenever I read these, this is going to be like a strange diversion. Whenever I read this midrash, I think of a terrible scene, which I'm sure happened many, many times over. There was a movie in the 1980s about the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising called The Wall. I can't remember if it was a made-for-TV movie. I saw it on TV, but I don't know if it was a made-for-TV movie or if it was a movie that was and ended up in the screens. At one point, I was looking for it later on in life, and the only thing I came up with was Pink Floyd's The Wall, and this was not Pink Floyd's The Wall, but this was the wall that essentially kept the Jews inside the Warsaw Ghetto. And I saw this as a young child, and it really burned into my brain, as things do when you're young, where the last remnants of the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising are fleeing under the sewers. And there's some scene, I can picture everything about the scene, although I have not seen the scene since probably 1981 or 82. And the last group of fighters is there, and they're trying to emerge from the sewers, and one of them has a baby, and the baby's crying. It's an infant. And there are 9 or 10 lives at stake, and the Nazis are all around, and the baby's crying. And you can imagine the pathos of the scene, and you can even imagine where I'm going with the description. At some point, the mother's trying to calm the baby and is not successful, and one of the other people there says, "Allow me," and he takes the baby, and he walks through the muck down one of the channels, a couple of feet, and comes back, and the baby's quiet. And the reason why the baby's quiet is because he's killed the baby. And the reason why he's killed the baby is to save the lives of the 9 people who are trying to escape in the tunnels. And it was one of the first times in my young life that I, really understood the incalculable trauma and the tragedy of I guess, if you want to generalize it, anybody fleeing a murderous society, but particularly the Jewish people in the Shoah, right? That the symbol of a community being reborn, with a baby being reborn, could actually be the thing that endangers you, because babies make noise, and babies make noise when you don't want them to make noise. And I always wondered so that was in my mind in the 1980s when I saw that when I was a young child. When I came across this Rashi, and this text, I wondered if there was a conscious or unconscious connection between the way that scene was written out and some of this material, or is it just a natural scene to be written out because that's probably what happened many times over. Okay. Let's go forward, Marshall. I don't think there are any hands up. So let's read what he says next. The next interesting or challenging word in the verse is this word gomeh.
Gomer, gemi bilshon mishnah. That the word gomer is the Mishnaic term gemi, which means, I guess here it is translated as paper reed. Uvelaz yunk. And here's an explanation for davar rach. It is a soft substance, v'hu made bifnei rach, and I guess it offers resistance to something which is both soft, v'ifnei kasher, and again something which may be hard.
Right. So when I've looked at English renderings of this Rashi to try to see how English turns this old French into an English letter thing, it's often written out as Jonc, jonc. I do not know nearly enough French to know what jonc means, but I assume that jonc means reeds, because that's how this is often understood, or wicker, right? And I love the way he describes it here. So it's the way I would read rach here is almost like pliable as opposed to soft. It's a pliable thing, I guess soft also, that sustains itself both in the presence of something soft, meaning it doesn't melt away, it doesn't just disappear. It's hard enough to sustain its contact with soft and wet things, and yet soft enough to sustain its contact with hard things. That's actually one of the interesting things about wicker, right? Wicker, and why it's a good flotation device. Larry, Bakasha, or Larry Diane?
So I'm assuming that the modern Hebrew word gumi for rubber band comes either from Rashi or from Gomeh in this verse.
That's interesting. Gumi. Is there a kind of taxonomic relationship between rubber and reed? Not that there needs to be in order for that to be true, but
it's flexible, and it's flexible and offers resistance to pressure. It fits the definition perfectly.
Yeah, it might even jump into English, right? Something which is gummy. Right. Interesting.
Gum, like from a gum tree, I think. So it all may be related.
Well, how about a rubber tree plant?
Whoops, there goes another rubber tree. There's gamish, too. It's sort of all clunked up together. There's,
Like gamish, when you add the shin to the root, gimel mem shin, it becomes flexible, right? So that is related in meaning. I'm not sure if it's related etymologically, right? Sometimes they are, they're not. You've got Renee, junco refers to a bird that lives amongst marsh rushes. Interesting. Meaning that's what your French dictionary says, Renee? Is that what you're saying? I can't hear you. Okay. Mostly Rashi here is just defining a term so that you have an image in your mind of what this ark was built out of. I see Barry, Kathy's hand, then Rebecca Leonard, and then Matt. Barry, Baksha?
I'm thinking papyrus. Papyrus has the structural this characteristic of being porous. It's rather hollow. Its surface is shiny and smooth, so it's relatively resistant to wet and scrunches if you squeeze it. And it's also hard. And so it has all those characteristics. I think they didn't have gum trees in Egypt. We don't have Tova here to verify what I said, but I don't think gum trees would be natural at that time in Egypt. But papyrus was, and it has these characteristics.
Yeah, this is the nice thing about Tova's not being here is that we can all of us can say anything we want today, and no one will be able to tell us if we're right or wrong.
I think it's papyrus, which has all the characteristics that we're describing here.
Okay, great. Rebecca, Leonard, and then someone else. Then Nat, I think. Not Nat. You're done. You don't want to say anything? Okay, Rebecca, Leonard, Raksha.
Hi. My dictionary says that Gemi and Gome are papyrus.
Well done, Barry. You didn't even need Tova here to verify that.
Now, the word gumi, on the other hand,
yes,
is a foreign word, and it actually comes from gumi, from Latin, but that comes from Greek, which in turn comes from Egyptian. So who knows?
I'm going to pause for a second and welcome. I'm not sure he's going to show his video, but my dear friend and chavruta and teacher, Rabbi David Ingber, who is the founder of Romamu in New York, saw the class on Facebook and decided he wanted to pop in and say hello. So you'll see a picture of him in the gallery with him with two of his kids. So welcome, Reb Ingber. It's an honor to have you with us as we study from Rashi.
I just wanted to hear your voice, and I wanted to hear your teaching and your students. And this is us here. We're just saying hello. And we're going to close it. Just listen. Is that okay?
Vakasha, I love you, my friend. Okay, Matt. Oh, no, Matt, you didn't want to speak anymore. So was anyone's hands up? They sure have gum trees in Sudan that was Upper Egypt one time. Okay, so we'll leave it as some combination of papyrus reed with a little bit of gum.
Oh.
Okay. Let's go to the next one. Speaking of Rashi amplification of verses that turn this rather mundane moment of a human being coming into the world, mundane because it happens all the time, into something that is presaging the remarkable life that this man's going to live. Okay, so you're back on Marshall Bachemar Uvazafet.
Okay, so Bachemar Uvazafet. Here I'm going to use Robert Alter's translation of those. Of Bachemar is with resin, Uvazafet with pitch. Zefet mi bachutz, so a pitch on the outside. Petit mi bifnim. And teat is like some kind of mortar or some kind of mud in the inside.
Right. Now pause 1 second before we read the next part of the Rashi, and particularly for those who haven't read ahead, what would you, given what you know about either of these materials, what are the main distinctions between clay, mud on the one hand, and pitch, tar on the other hand, particularly as it comes to where you'd want it to be? Marshall?
Well, pitch, I think, is oftentimes very smelly, and mud does not give off any kind of smell. Right.
Some of us are living right now within olfactory distance of the tar pits, right? Those La Brea, I think, by the way, in Spanish, La Brea mean tar pits. Isn't La Brea tar pits like a redundancy?
Yes.
It's like when I was a camper in the 1980s, we had Yom Sport Day because they didn't figure out that the Yom was mentioned twice. So Zefet is understood to be that black, sticky tar. We mentioned it. Sometimes you on certain beaches, it's in the water, and you come out of the water, and it's on your feet. Right? It's a very good caulker. Right? If you're using that as a way of plugging up a hole, it's probably going to stop the water from coming through. It's resistant to water, but it's not particularly present. Whereas mortar and clay and chemar also will harden in between cracks and prevent things from coming through, but mostly not particularly smelly. Barry, you're a potter amongst us, so what do you think?
Well, clay will dissolve in water. It's not waterproof. The tar is waterproof, but you don't want the tar on your feet, like you said. So the clay would separate the body from the tar.
Great. Now, with that in mind, read the where Rashi goes next, Marshall.
Okay. Kadei shelo yariach oto tzaddik reach ra shel zefet. In order that this tzaddik, this righteous boy, I guess, would not smell it, a bad smell of pitch.
So in your own words, what's Rashi's explanation for why the Torah goes to lengths? And I mean lengths in quotation marks, but telling us specifically not just that he was in a wicker basket and he was waterproof, but specifically it didn't just have chemar, it had zephet, or it didn't just have zephet, it had chemar, right? What Rashi is responding to is the somewhat unnecessary specificity of the materials used to build this. So in your own answer, Marshall, or anyone else whose hand is up, what's the answer in your own words? Larry, Diane? What's the answer? I don't know if that's the question you're answering, but...
No, that's not the question I was answering.
Well, answer that question first.
Repeat the question.
What's Rashi saying, right? If the problem is what... Yeah?
He didn't want Moses to be offended by the smell.
Right. The savior of the Jewish people should not be saved in a stinky little basket, right? This was if there was any zephet to be found, it was nowhere near the baby. There was chemar in between him and the zephet, and there was goma in between him. The zephet was just on the outside to make sure he wouldn't drown. God forbid, little baby Moses, who produced, I'm sure, many smelly things many times a day, did not have to deal with the smelliness of the zephet. That's what the Midrash is saying. Larry, go ahead.
So my question and comment, it's actually a comment, is how much more Rashi would actually be offended if he knew what I think this really is referring to. So, first of all, pitch and tar and bitumen obviously are coming from things like oil. So it's not that common in Egypt. And in fact, the way in which Egypt is an African country, the way in which Africans make their huts or make their mortar is the way that they do throughout Africa and lots of other places of the world where you don't have something like bitumen.
What's bitumen?
They mix the clay and the dirt with manure. Mix it with manure, and that's how you put things around and make your hut. You make your bricks and you put the bricks together that way. And it could well be, though I have no proof that zevet could possibly be that or zavat could possibly be that in fact it was a manure-based sort of resin that was placed around the reeds, because that's exactly how you would build a hut, in order to make this floating ark. And he wouldn't, if he knew that it was manure, how much more would Rashi have been offended at the nation?
What is bitumen?
Bitumen is the lowest when you refine oil, okay, and the top layer is the jet fuel, and the bottom layer, I can't remember if the bottom layer is either bitumen or bunker fuel, one of the two. It just goes to the bottom. It's the heaviest, goopiest, thickest part of what is oil. And it sometimes seeps through the ground. Why it would rise, I don't know. I can't explain that. So what people call tar or pitch is often a form of bitumen.
I see. Interesting. You know, the people who are gathered here every week to study Torah have such a beautiful and wide array of backgrounds and expertises that, on the one hand, Rashi knew 1 billion times more about the tradition than we'll ever know combined. But he couldn't possibly have fathomed the expertises in the foci and the geographic and historical and botanical and materiological knowledges that help us really make sense of this. I'm so appreciative when people bring in from their real knowledge of the way the world actually is. It takes nothing away from Rashi's beautiful spiritual guesswork, right? But it also helps us try to understand things as they really were. So thank you for that, Larry. Joel and then Rebecca Leonard.
I just want to point out the parallel between the Moses story and the Joseph story, that Joseph also, in order to save his people, he had to be removed from his family and sent to some powerful person in Egypt. And in Joseph's vessel that he was taken to Egypt in was the Midianites. And they mentioned that the Midianites were selling perfume and stuff. And Rashi said the reason that they were selling perfume was so he wouldn't have to have bad smells on his way to Egypt. So very similar.
Right. So it's so wonderful to be reminded of that Moshe Yosef association. Rebecca Leonard.
If we look back in the story of Noah's Ark in Breshit, chapter 6, verse 14, the Ark also, Noah was instructed to use pitch, but Rashi comments that the Ark, there was pitch inside as well as outside because the waters were going to be rough and rapid. So it was needed in both cases, unlike the ark or cradle that Moses was placed in where the water was not going to be rapid and such. So it was okay to just have the pitch on the outside.
Right. And there's so much being taught here about the rabbis imagining the beginnings of the life of the person who's going to be their savior. Right. It was as the references back to Yosef and to the Noah story that this was not a tumultuous, stormy water, but a gentle stream. It only needed zephyr on the outside. Therefore, Moshe didn't have to be troubled by that smell. And even as his life is imperiled, he's somehow in the lap of luxury, right? Like he's so comfortably nestled into this beautiful vessel, which is like the appropriate way for the Savior of Israel to begin his life, as it were. Great. Okay, let's keep going. Rashi's got one more comment on this verse. So, Marshall, you're still up?
Okay, Vatasem Basuf, and he placed him in the Suf. Hulishon Agam. Such is the language of Agam. I guess Agam can mean like a pool or a lake.
Right, so here's where Rashi's use of Hebrew words in his generation to make sense of Hebrew words in the Torah rubs up against our inherited use of Hebrew 1,000 years later. So Rashi's saying to you, the reader, hey, you reader in 11th century France who might not really understand the word suf, even though you've seen it several times and you're going to see it in the Torah, think of it as the word agam. I believe, this is now Adam Kligfeld, I believe that when Rashi uses the word agam, he doesn't think what we think when we hear the word agam, which is either amazing artist with a fountain in Tel Aviv, or a lake or a pond, but a swamp, kind of a marshy swamp, right? Imagine a marshy swamp that is too wet to really walk in with normal shoes, but also has reeds everywhere, right? That's what I believe medieval Hebrew thought of as the word agam. And he gives us this word in French. Keep going.
Rosel Belaz.
Right. I think it's sometimes spelled in the English translation of Rashi as Roseil, Rosel. Again, I don't know what that word means. Do we have any French speakers today? Or here, I don't remember if any of us speak French. Okay, so hold on one second, then we'll get to Joel and to Barry. And then he gives one more phrase, and I believe that the particular example he gives is playing two roles simultaneously. So go ahead, V'domelo.
V'domelo kaneh v'suf kamelu. And similar to it is, so I'm going to again use Alter's translation. Kaneh is rush, vasuf, a reed thicket, will wither.
Right. So he points us to a verse in Isaiah, which I will tell you, like when Rashi points us to a verse that tells what a word means, he's usually pointing us to a verse where it's more obvious what the word means there. There's nothing specifically more obvious about what suf means in that verse than it is in ours, except that it distinguishes between suf and kaneh is a reed. So the only thing that verse really does is tell us, if you thought the word suf itself means reed, it doesn't, because in this verse in Isaiah, it's kaneh vasuf, to suggest that kaneh, reed, and whatever suf is will wither. But I think there's a secondary reason why he's giving us this verse. I'm not suggesting that anyone has comprehensive knowledge of the book of Isaiah, but in the 19th chapter of Isaiah, Isaiah is prophesying about the downfall and the deterioration of what kingdom? Guess?
Egypt.
Anyone? What's that?
Probably Egypt.
Egypt, right? So Rashi takes a verse from the prophecy of Isaiah, which uses the word suf, which kind of helps define the word, but not really, because it's not like it's a verse that describes suf. It just differentiates suf from kaneh, but it's talking about the downfall of Egypt. And I love the fact that it cannot be a coincidence that Rashi, in trying to explain the matrix in which the person who is going to be the savior of Israel and the defeater of Egypt is protected, quotes a verse with Isaiah, many, many hundreds of years later, prophesying against that very Egypt or the inheritors of that Egypt. Marshall, since you have the floor, we'll go you, and then Joel, and then Barry, and then Rick.
Okay, so I think also the use of the word suf here is really a foreshadowing of the Yam Suf. So in effect, Moses is being put into the Suf here as a baby, and he will lead the people through the Yam Suf.
Absolutely, right? On a pshat level, we don't even need Rashi for that. On a pshat level, the birth of the people of Israel at the hands of the Savior happens in the same way that the saving of the Savior happens, right? And we've talked before about how Yam Suf, and we'll get there eventually, is a very birth-like image, right? And Suf is the connecting material there. Okay, Joel, Barry, Rick. Go ahead, Joel. Can't hear you yet.
Yeah, I was just wondering whether the word agam comes from the word gomeh. They both relate to reeds.
Yeah, could be. I hadn't thought about that. We do sometimes see two-letter roots going forward and backward and creating like a family of roots.
Especially with an aleph. An aleph is very...
Right. I'd love it if Leonard has any kind of answer to that, but off the top of my head, I had not made that connection. Rebecca, Leonard, you want to answer that and then we'll get to Barry?
Yes. So agam is defined as a lake or a pool or a pond or reeds. And interestingly, in Arabic, there is a cognate, ma'ajim, which is a pool full of reeds.
Oh, got it. Great. Well done, Joel. Thank you, Leonard. Barry, Bakasha.
Yeah, well, two things just touching on reeds. Papyrus in its natural state are reeds. So there's a lot of them there that she could make the papyrus basket from. But what I wanted to focus on is her putting the baby in the river. When she realizes, Yocheved realizes she can't keep the baby any longer, she builds this thing. She hasn't been instructed to build it like the building of the ark, but she does so, and then she puts it in the river. She has some prophetic belief that it will be okay, that this special light that has been given to her will be saved, will be good.
Yeah. By
doing this. I mean, what is the mother doing? Putting her baby in the river. She has some belief. I think it's very powerful. The vatasem she put. This is very powerful.
Yeah, I'm glad you raised that, Barry. We're focusing, I think, properly because Rashi's kind of pointing us in that direction to the baby and to the person the baby's going to be becoming, and almost like the prophetic way in which the baby's being saved imagines his being the savior. But the agency of the mother is really significant here, right? There's no Vayomer Adonai El Yocheved, right? Mm-hmm. God said to the mother of this baby, this is what you should do. She just does it. Wonderful. Matt, thank you for that comment that in modern French, rosé is reed, so not the swamp, but the reed itself, and jonc is rushes. Great. Helpful. Rick, and then Diane Larry.
Yeah, hi. I just realized that I always thought that Moses is floating down the Nile for, a few yards, even longer. But no, he's just sitting there in the reeds at the side of the river. And they put him there because looking ahead, that's where exactly the daughter of Pharaoh is going to go bathe. So he wasn't floating down the river for a long time. He's just sitting there in the basket, is what I think it reads.
Right, and think of the fact that if it's a marsh with reeds, it's not a Nile, right? Right. Let's say it this way: if you asked like a 11-year-old fresh off of religious school, where was Moshe found? They would say in the Nile River, right? The Nile River it's like the Mississippi, right? But here, imagine water, but a marshy water where there are reeds. It's going to actually prevent flowing. It's going to allow for being a hiding, right? Like only a slow moving of anything of the basket, but kind of hiding within the reeds, right? Which is very different than flowing down, over Niagara Falls. Diane, Larry. By the way, Rick, I want to say that the way that you're set up there looks like you're like a disc jockey in Hawaii or something. I love it. With the microphone and the thing, it looks like, and you're doing the morning show from Kona. There's something about that setup that looks like you're on vacation in Polynesia. So I hope it's as fun as it looks. Diane and Larry.
Well, first of all, we concur with your observation about Rick. I thought that when I first saw him. So this comment, I don't know how to put it. It's not a digression. It has nothing to do with the text. It has to do with our language. So several times you and others have made a reference that to me sounds like fingernails along a chalkboard. It just grates me.
Okay.
That is, we're referring to Moses as the Savior. I don't think we ever talk about Moses or Joseph or anybody as the Savior. This is a theological question beyond my pay grade, but every time we use that term, it's like it rattles my ears.
Yeah. I'm glad you mentioned it because, you ever hear yourself start to say something and you're wondering how a particular word got into your brain? Because I also don't ever refer to Moshe as the Savior. I think, if I'm being honest, I think I'm unconsciously impacted by something that Rashi wrote in the scene where he's trying to explain how his Pharaoh's magicians got half of this right, but not all of it right. And they got a prophecy that Moshiach shel Yisrael, that the Savior of Israel was born today. It was back on the Rashi. So in Rashi chapter, the last verse of the previous chapter, this is when Rashi is trying to explain did Pharaoh really make this decree that all boys, not just Israelite boys, be thrown into the water? L'cholamo, af alehem gazar, even upon them he decreed. Yom shenolad Moshe, on the day that Moshe was born, amrulo itstagninav, his magician said to him, or his prophet said to him, Hayom nolad Moshiach, today their Savior was born. And I think, frankly, unconsciously, not because I've changed my theology, I've been using that image today and last week because that language influenced me. But I'm not trying to make any statement. I have the same fingernails on the blackboard reaction to myself. So don't read too much into it. But I think that I'm just impacted by that phrase, Moshiach. You're right. We don't think of Moses as Savior. We think of him as agent of the Savior. Right. We don't think of him as demigod. We think of him as extraordinarily human and flawed and broken and extraordinarily close to the Holy One. So I appreciate your pointing that out. All right. Did we finish Rashi? Woo! Okay. So let's start with the next verse. Who hasn't spoken today? We should speak? Carol, do you want to read Vatitatzav?
Wait, can I just?
No, go ahead, Matt.
When the word Moshiach is the song we sing at Hanukkah, Maccabim Moshiach Ufoder.
Yes.
That's also, I guess, the lowercase s Savior, someone who saved us from destruction, but not the.
Right, and listen, Yehoshua, right, is Joshua is named the one who will bring Savior. I guess I like that lowercase s, right? It's one can help a rescue without being the divine rescuer.
Right.
Question: where in liturgy the verb lahoshia is applied not only to God. I got to think more about that. All right, Carol, b'vakasha, if you're willing to.
Vatetatsav achoto merachok l'de'a ma ya'aselo.
Okay, a short, chunky verse that Rashi is quiet on, which means that we can focus really just on the words themselves.
I assume it means she was standing, but I don't know how to unpack that. I don't know the root of tatsav.
Yudsadi.
Right, so it's either, depending on which dictionary you look at, some people will name the root as Yud, Tzadi, Bet, like in modern Hebrew, Yatziv is something very stable. You might know it from the parsha at the end of the Dvarim, Nitzavim, Atem Nitzavim Kulchem Hayom. You're all standing here, but since it's an intensive version of standing, the commentaries go crazy. Why does God say Atem Nitzavim and not Atem Omdim? So some people would also write this root as Nun Tzadi Bet, but most would write it as Yud Tzadi Bet. And Vatetat Sav, I would love Vered's thoughts on this. It looks to me like a nifal, a third person, not nifal. So correct me.
It's hitpael, binyan hitpael, and it should have been, had it been according to the rule of the grammar, should have been vatit yatsev. So vatit yatsev. So putting it in a hitpael means kind of reflexive that she stood there by herself, but though it doesn't say by herself, it says that she stood there with her ama, and that's another story. But Achoto is Miriam, right? So yes. Miriam stood there maybe by herself without any other family member as a protection to know she didn't stand close by. She had like a little hiding place, maybe from far, merachok, from far. Lede'a is a very old Shema Poal infinitive of the verb to know, and should have been by the rule lada'at, but we have verbs like this that are peyud, like leleda, lede'a, so that means to know.
Right.
So,
right.
She stood there, the verb yatsav. His sister Miriam stood there from distance, from far, to know Maya Sebo, what will be done to him.
Right. So thank you for that, Vered. And your correction of my guess of Nifal is borne out by Onkelos, because if you see how Onkelos translates it, he translates into what would be called the et pa'el in Aramaic, same thing as hit pa'el,
right,
but clearly reflexive, using a different shoresh, ve'it atadat, which is clearly in the reflexive, right? So that opens up a lot of interesting questions. Is what is the power of the reflexiveness of this verb? Does it suggest aloneness? Does it suggest something that she was doing to herself? What's the difference between to stand and to stand oneself, right? And interestingly, if you look at Ibn Ezra, who is of all the people on the page, the one who's most focused on precision of grammar, bottom right on our page, Ibn Ezra HaKatzar, on the word Batei Tatsav, Milah Zara, strange word, he says. Ukfar his Kira Bal Hadikduk, and he makes reference to a medieval grammar book, and without explaining it, saying, and this guy in this grammar book has already dealt with it. So Ibn Ezra doesn't deal with it. He just says, if you think it's a strange word, it is a strange word. I'm not going to deal with it, but someone else did. Okay, let's go back to Carol for a second, and then to Rick, because Carol, we kind of stole your translation thunder. Anything else you want to add as you're working through what the words mean in the verse?
No, I think Vered covered it.
Okay, so good. So she stood herself, she betook herself to the side from a distance. Lidea, that weird infinitive, right? Even those of us who know a little bit of Hebrew know that the impact of the word is infinitive, but the look doesn't look it. Ma ye aselo, that's nifal. What would happen to him? Okay. Now I'm going to predict, because I'm a prophet, that Rick is going to talk about the Zakev Gadol on Lede'ah. Let's see if I'm right.
Yeah, I was going to bring that up. It's the highlight of the verse, but I don't know much more to do with it. I looked at the next Zakev Gadol, and there's 3 of them, but it doesn't really connect. What I wanted to say was kudos to Miriam, because like we're saying that God didn't tell Yocheved to put the baby in the basket. The mother Yocheved didn't tell Miriam, hey, go stand over here. She stands herself. So she's trying to save her brother all by herself. And I like that a lot.
Yeah. And I remember something I said, I remember 2 or 3 weeks ago, that the Talmud, Masechet Pesachim, and several other places uses these narratives to explain why even women in Talmudic law, who are normally exempt from time-bound positive mitzvot, are obligated to the 4 cups of wine on Pesach, right? Because the women were as involved in the miracle of the redemption of Israel and the Exodus as men were. And what's the proof text? Yocheved and Miriam. Miriam chastising her father, getting him to be back with his mother, and this kind of not pushed by God to do so, but protecting the person who would eventually lead the Israelites out of Egypt. And because women were involved in that salvation story, there's that word again, according to the Talmud and according to the Tosafot's commentary on the Talmud, they too are obligated to drink the 4 cups of wine, even though drinking the 4 cups of wine is a positive time-bound mitzvah, and generally, traditionally speaking, women would be exempt from it. One note, because you didn't expand on it, Rick, and then we'll hear Rebecca Leonard, then we'll end the class. That gadol, that zakef gadol, I learned it as a gadol, some people call it a zakef gadol in the middle of that verse, is the only thing in this short little verse that is at all musically non-mundane. Depending on how you do it, so maybe when we come back next week, we can linger on what meanings the word lidei are pregnant with, such that the music is built up the way, because it didn't have to be. Rebecca Leonard, and then Diane Larry, and then we'll call it a class. Go ahead.
Okay, I just wanted the difference between the Netzav and the Yatzav.
Yeah.
So Netzav is to stand up, whereas Yatzav is to station oneself or to take one's stand. This one has to be Yatzav and not Netzav, because Yud Tzadi Bet has a Hitpa'el form and the Nun Tzadi Bet does not.
Fascinating. Thank you for that. I would not have been able to make that fine distinction. Thank you. Diane Larry.
So I can't find any commentators that say anything about Lede'ah, and Rick, I knew he was going to say something as well. But to me, it's like clear. I don't understand why no one else is saying this. She didn't want to know what would happen to him only in the Nile, but so that she would know what would happen to him in his life. And I won't use the word, but that he would become the leader. He would become the person that would take them out of Egypt. Why didn't anybody even suggest that?
They're saying that the Lede'ah here is not just momentary knowledge of this scene, but she watched it so she could see the large unfolding of this kid's life?
Yes, that's why I think the Masorite, whoever put the Nukudot on the Tamim on the Torah trope, I want to think that the guy that put the Zakef Gadol there said because she would know everything.
Right. The guy who put the trope there, you mean God, I assume. Wonderful. So thank you for the 5 extra minutes today. I apologize if you had to get somewhere at 9:30. We'll call it a day.
You have been listening to another in our series of podcasts from Temple Beth Am, a dynamic center for conservative Judaism in Los Angeles. If you enjoy these podcasts, we invite you to write a review on the Apple Podcast site or wherever you get your podcasts. For more information about Temple Beth Am Los Angeles, go to tbala.org.